A cold-blooded husband driven by an affair, ends up taking the lives of his own wife and children. Welcome to Crime Story. Today, I'm bringing you a story that is both horrifying and deeply haunting. The Chris Watts case, a father, a husband, and a man who turned love into something unspeakable. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family, bright smiles, happy kids, and a baby on the way. But behind that image was a web of secrets, betrayal, and a chilling plan that would shock an entire nation. If you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more powerful stories straight to you. Let's begin. They looked like a dream, Chris and Shanann Watts. The kind of couple you'd scroll past on Facebook and feel a flicker of envy. Two happy little girls in their arms, a cozy home glowing behind them, and that sparkle in Shanann's eyes every time she spoke about her family. She was expecting their third child, a son. Life, at least online, appeared beautifully complete. But sometimes the prettiest pictures are painted to hide the cracks. And in this case, the cracks weren't just beneath the surface. They were growing in silence, beneath layers of smiles, inside unread messages and quiet stares across the dinner table. Until one day, they swallowed everything whole. It was August 2018 when Shanann and the girls disappeared. At first, the world watched with sympathy as Chris stood in front of news cameras, his voice trembling, begging for answers. A father, seemingly broken. A husband, seemingly desperate. But there was something in his presence that didn't sit right. Something hollow. Something rehearsed. 3 days later, the truth began to drip out. Not all at once, but slowly, like the unraveling of a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. What followed wasn't just a criminal investigation. It was a peeling back of everything people thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the human heart. Because in this story, the danger didn't come in the night. It lived within the walls of a quiet suburban home. This is not just the tale of a missing family. It's the haunting echo of what happens when truth is buried under performance, when affection turns into silence, and when one man trades the life he built for a secret he couldn't keep. They were the kind of family people quietly admired from afar. Chris and Shanann Watts, living in the quiet town of Frederick, Colorado, with two little girls who lit up every frame of their mother's phone camera. Bella, soft-spoken and sweet. Celeste, wild and giggly. And in Shanann's growing belly another child, a boy, waiting to complete what looked like the picture-perfect American dream. Shanann didn't keep this happiness to herself. She lived loudly, sharing snapshots of their life online, morning routines, weekend adventures, family trips to the beach. She filmed their daughters twirling in tutus, whispered bedtime wishes to her unborn son, and posted love notes she said Chris had left her. Thousands followed her updates. To them, she wasn't just a mother. She was a woman who'd beaten the odds, surviving illness, finding love, building a home. But even the brightest homes can hold shadows. Behind the doors of that 5-bedroom house, quiet things had begun to shift. The couple's finances were strained. They'd filed for bankruptcy just a few years earlier. Shanann, though proud and self-sufficient, carried much of the weight through her work-from-home job. Chris, once attentive and affectionate, had grown quiet. Distant. Like someone slipping through a crack only he could see. And there were other tensions, more private, more painful. A growing divide between Shanann and her in-laws, sharpened by moments of misunderstanding and mistrust. Words said. Feelings bruised. And beneath it all, something Chris had not spoken of openly, a secret relationship that would later cast a long, chilling shadow over everything. It's strange how lives unravel. Not with sirens or screams, but in silence. In small, unnoticed ways, a missed phone call here, a cold glance there. And in the Watts home, that silence was getting louder. It was just past 2 a.m. when Shanann Watts stepped out of her friend's car and walked back into her home for the last time. She had just returned from a business trip, a bit tired, but hopeful. In her suitcase were baby onesies and notes for the future. In her heart, a quiet storm she hadn't yet named. The front door closed behind her. And then, silence. By mid-morning, the silence had stretched too far. Messages went unanswered. Shanann missed a doctor's appointment she'd been looking forward to. Her friend Nicole, the one who had dropped her off hours earlier, started to worry. Calls went straight to voicemail. Texts were left unread. Something felt off. Nicole reached out to Chris. His reply came quickly, but without clarity. He said Shanann had taken the girls to a friend's place but couldn't say which friend, or why. It didn't sit right. Shanann wasn't the type to disappear without a word. Especially not while pregnant. Especially not with two little girls in tow. Nicole didn't wait. She drove to the Watts home herself, standing on the porch of that silent house. The blinds were drawn. The driveway was still. She knocked. She called. And when there was still no answer, she called the police. When officers arrived, something felt wrong, not loud or obvious, but quietly, wrong. Shanann's car was in the garage. Her purse, phone, keys, even her medication all untouched inside. The house was orderly. Too orderly. No signs of struggle. No broken glass. But no note, no explanation, no trace of a mother and her two daughters either. Then Chris came home. Calm. Cooperative. Polite. He opened the door, invited them in, answered questions with practiced ease. He seemed helpful, almost too helpful. He explained that things had been tense lately, but nothing dramatic. He offered theories, none of which quite landed. It was the kind of calm that doesn't comfort, it unsettles. Because when someone you love disappears without a trace, chaos usually follows. But Chris stood in the eye of the storm like he didn't even notice the wind. And that was when the quiet started to feel dangerous. The hours turned into days, but time didn't bring answers, only more questions. And slowly, investigators began to shift their gaze from the unknown, to the person standing in plain sight. Chris Watts, the concerned husband, the grieving father. He was starting to feel less like a victim and more like a puzzle. A puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. Detectives noticed something strange about Chris almost immediately. His calmness wasn't the kind that came from composure, it was hollow, like someone moving through a scene he had rehearsed too many times. There was no urgency in his voice, no chaos in his body language. Just quiet answers, calculated pauses, and a mask that seemed too tightly held. Then came the neighbor's security footage. It showed Chris backing his truck into the garage in the early hours of August 13th. A small action. Easy to overlook. But it was a move that he had never done before, not once. And it happened at the very time his wife and children were said to have vanished. While the world watched him beg for help on television, Chris was making quiet calls behind the scenes. One to his daughter's school, asking them to unenroll the girls. Another to a real estate agent, casually inquiring about selling the family home. It was as if he had already written the ending to a story everyone else still believed had just begun. Investigators brought him in for questioning. They watched his eyes. Listened to his words. And when they asked if he'd take a polygraph test, Chris agreed without hesitation. It was a decision that surprised many until the results came back. He failed. Not just slightly, but unmistakably. And when faced with the results, Chris didn't protest. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked for one thing, to speak with his father. In that quiet room, with cameras watching and trust unraveling, Chris finally let his words fall. It wasn't the whole truth, not yet, but it was enough. He admitted that Shanann was gone. And the girls, they were gone too. There was no emotion. No tears. Just a man who had run out of space to hide. It was a barren stretch of land, quiet and still beneath the Colorado sky, just another remote oil field, far from neighborhoods and streetlights, where time seemed to stand still. That's where Chris Watts took the investigators. His face was unreadable. His voice flat. And then, with a gesture so subtle it almost felt unreal, he pointed to the earth. They began to dig. Beneath the dirt, tucked beneath a shallow layer of soil, lay what they had feared. Shanann. A mother, daughter, friend, now just a name in a report, waiting to be moved gently back into the world she'd vanished from. And nearby, 2 large oil tanks stood like silent sentinels. Cold. Industrial. Unfeeling. The recovery team approached with dread in their hearts. What they found inside would change them. We won't describe it here, some things are too sacred, too heavy to reduce to words. But it was enough to silence even the most seasoned professionals. Enough to bring investigators to the edge of collapse. Because this wasn't just evidence. This was the end of innocence. This was where hope officially turned to mourning. Back at the station, Chris tried one last story. He said Shanann had done something terrible, and he had simply reacted. It was a desperate attempt to shift blame, to rewrite the narrative one more time. But the pieces didn't fit. The timeline was too neat. The details too clean. And the science, it quietly erased his lie. Autopsy reports, digital footprints, phone records, all of it painted a different picture. A far more tragic one. One where the decisions were made long before that morning. One where Chris wasn't reacting. He was planning. And so, the world saw the mask fall for good. The truth, once uncovered, doesn't wait politely to be judged. On August 20, 2018, the law caught up with Chris Watts. The charges were heavy, and rightly so: 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count for the unlawful ending of a pregnancy, and 3 more for tampering with the dignity of the departed. Each count carried with it not just legal weight, but the unspoken sorrow of a community struggling to understand how something so devastating could wear the face of normalcy for so long. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a courtroom beginning to echo with names he once called family, Chris made a decision that shocked no one, yet still chilled the room. He pleaded guilty to all charges. It was a move that spared him the death penalty but not the finality of justice. In November 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life terms, without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. But justice, for all its legal clarity, is rarely neat. The courtroom was thick with silence and grief. Shanann's family sat just feet away from the man who had once promised to love and protect her. Their voices, though steady, trembled with heartbreak as they spoke not just for Shanann, but for Bella, for Celeste, for the baby who never saw the world. They spoke of birthdays that would never come, of empty chairs at Christmas, of lullabies cut short. There were no outbursts. No rage. Only the aching quiet of lives forever changed. And Chris, he listened, emotionless. The same stillness he had shown in those early interviews, now replaying beneath the weight of a judge's words. There was no final speech, no tears. Just a man, now sentenced to vanish from public life, locked away with nothing but his memories, and his guilt. The question lingers in the air like smoke that refuses to clear: why? What could possibly make a man erase everything he helped create? Years have passed since the morning Chris Watts stepped into infamy, but the question hasn't lost its sting. In living rooms, courtrooms, and documentaries, people still ask, why did he do it? Some point to the obvious: the affair, the excitement of someone new, the fantasy of a different life. His relationship with Nicole Kessinger offered him an escape hatch, a version of himself that didn't carry diapers and debt. She was freedom, adventure, a mirror that didn't reflect the responsibilities he had built. To her, he was a man starting over. Not a father. Not a husband. Just Chris. Others see pressure points cracking beneath the surface, money problems that never seemed to go away, a marriage that had become colder over time, and the unexpected weight of another child on the way. A baby boy he didn't ask for, didn't seem ready for. It was a future bearing down on him, and he, too proud or too afraid to face it, chose the darkest way out. Psychologists have a name for this kind of crime: family annihilation. It's rare. And when it does happen, it's almost always the same: a man who feels cornered by life, by expectation, by shame. A man who believes, in some distorted way, that erasing the people closest to him is easier than letting the world see him fall apart. It's not anger that drives it. It's desperation, disguised as silence. And what does Chris say? In interviews from behind prison walls, he offers no satisfying answers. He talks about feeling distant, like he was watching someone else do the unthinkable. He describes a morning where everything moved like a dream, or maybe a nightmare: his emotions gone, his mind quiet. A kind of darkness he can't name. But even he admits, if I had just stopped and thought, none of this would have happened. A simple sentence. A chilling truth. Because sometimes, the scariest kind of monster isn't the one who plans with rage, it's the one who drifts into destruction without even understanding why. Today, Chris Watts exists not as a husband, a father, or even a man with a name most people speak aloud. He exists as inmate number 674,796, locked away in a cell where time no longer passes in days, but in echoes. Solitary confinement keeps him apart from others but not from himself. Because in the silence of that cell, there's nowhere to run from what he did. And perhaps worse than the memories, are the voices. One in particular. A small voice. Fragile. Terrified. Whispering, "Daddy, please don't do this." Those 6 words have never left him. And maybe that's the only form of justice that truly fits. Outside the prison walls, the world kept moving, but it did not forget. Shannan's family, bearing the weight of unimaginable loss, chose not to hide in the shadows. Instead, they spoke. They turned their grief into warning signs for others, advocating for awareness around emotional abuse, manipulation, and the subtle, silent erosion that can happen inside relationships that look fine from the outside. They remind us that danger doesn't always come with fists or threats. Sometimes, it comes in quiet withdrawal. In passive lies. In missed calls and fake smiles. Sometimes, it comes dressed like the man who said "I do." The Watts case is more than a crime story, it's a tragedy that peeled back the layers of an ordinary life to reveal a storm no one saw coming. And in its wake, we're left with a haunting truth: monsters don't always hide under the bed. Sometimes, they kiss their children goodnight. The Watts case doesn't just leave behind an empty house and unanswered questions. It leaves a lingering shadow, a chilling reminder that darkness doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes, it smiles. It holds your hand. It tucks your children into bed. Sometimes, it looks exactly like love. It teaches us that danger isn't always loud. That evil doesn't always arrive like a storm, it grows quietly, beneath routines, in unspoken words, in choices made behind closed doors. And by the time the world notices, it's too late. If you're watching this and something inside you feels heavy, uncertain, or too familiar, please, don't stay quiet. Whether it's you or someone you know, help is out there. No one deserves to live in fear, to walk on eggshells, to feel invisible in their own home. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, speaking up is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for joining us in honoring Shannan, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico. Their lives were full of love, laughter, and light. Let's carry that forward, not just in memory, but in action. Let's notice the signs. Let's ask the hard questions. Let's protect each other better. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something daunting, let that go. like, subscribe, share. Help us shine a light on the dark corners, one story at a time. This has been a hashtag chilling case. Stay aware. Stay human. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you reflect, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling case like this one. Your support means everything to us and it helps keep these important stories alive. Thank you for watching Crime Story. Stay safe. Stay aware. And remember, sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones who live right beside us.